You're listening to Lender Lounge with Kevin Kim, a podcast dedicated to the private lending industry. I'm Kevin Kim, and my goal is to sit down with key figures in the private lending industry to talk about their business and their personal lives. We'll get their takes on market conditions, the industry at large, and their personal stories. Overall, I really want to learn more about how they started and grew their businesses. So whether you're a lender, a borrower, a vendor, an investor, or anyone just interested in learning more about private lending, this podcast is definitely for you. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy this week's episode of Lender Lounge with Kevin Kim. This episode is sponsored by PrivateLenderLink.com, where investors and brokers find direct private lending companies throughout the United States. This month, they launched a major upgrade to the site with an improved design and a new user experience, enabling property investors and brokers to create a loan request. Simply fill out the loan details once, then browse direct lenders' profiles and choose which lenders you want to invite to view your loan request. The lenders can indicate their interest and send you messages through our platform. If you like some assistance, Private Lender Link can review your loan request and invite a few select lenders that they recommend. View PrivateLenderLink.com today and use it as a resource for all of your private lending needs. All right, guys, I am here live at the, I think it's the fall seminar for CMA.
It is.
And we had a gap in the schedule, so I sat down with my friend Huy here and wanted to interview him for the show. Huy, please introduce yourself.
Great. Hey, it's a pleasure. It's an honor. This is like being on Conan O'Brien's Need a Friend podcast. I've been listening for a while, and it's good to be with you. It's good to be with the crew here. So Huy Do, PrideCo Capital. I've been with the firm for 14 years. I'm one of the 3 owners of PrideCo. We started off as a family office, family that sold couplers and disconnects, and sold off a large business back in 2006, which was the greatest time to sell a business because the valuations were ultra high. Tough time to become an investor. So when I started, we had a lot of workouts, and over the course of the years, we worked out a lot of the investments. We got into private lending really early on, and one of the my partner, who's the son of the family, was kind of really enjoyed the middle market, and so he, out of Princeton, went straight to Michael Milken's shop, and so Drexel was kind of this middle market lender way back in the day, 89, 90, and so he really enjoyed that space, and so we like this space, really kind of lending right above credit quality of what a bank can't do because of speed or what have you. And so we got into asset-based lending, and really it kind of ended up with a mixed basket of assets, ranging from anything factoring to kind of generic asset-based lending. So jewelry,
Wow.
airplanes,
all of it, huh?
everything. So basically what a bank wouldn't do, we would
And
lend on.
what year was this again?
I think 2006 to 2009.
Interesting.
So we've done, high-end life insurance policies. We've looked at every single type of asset. And so kind of being true family office, you can imagine a staff that's dedicated to manage the affairs of the family, which
Right.
is the tax work, the legal work, making all the investments from the core side, the non-core side. And then, of course, non-core is kind of defined for us as everything from private equity, venture, equity into real estate, equity into the kind of private equity piece that I mentioned, and then, of course, lending.
Right.
And so we really liked lending. We got into lending and ABL, like I said. And during the workout, 09, 10, the thing that didn't move and was easy to understand for us that were non-real estate guys was really single-family real estate.
Right.
And with all the tools like Zillows and Redfins and some of this prop tech that popped up, it was easier for us to evaluate those, make loans.
Like a similar type of philosophy from asset-based.
Yeah.
Easy to value.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was more asset-based, less credit-based.
Right.
And it was, we had kind of this box that we carved out as far as coastal properties, LA, San Diego, Orange County, and we really enjoyed it. And it was really the family we run, their capital. And then over time, we added, friends of ours would say, hey, what do you do for fixed income?
Right.
And we say, well, we do this thing called private lending. And there was this book called Trust Deed Investing by this guy named Casimir Dominitz. I don't know if you remember that book.
It's one of
Old
the
school, right?
It's one of the
Yeah.
what do you call it? Like the fundamental books that you read when you come into this space, right?
1980s, horrible graphics. And so if you go to Amazon, I think you can find it. And my partner Brandon actually found the book, and so he's more of a traditional kind of core allocator,
Right.
and so CFA, CPA, and so this book kind of got us into really hard money lending, and then so we started using brokers, and so we used a few brokers, and they brought us the deals, and we funded it, and we funded larger ones, racetracks, campgrounds,
All kinds.
all over the state. And really, we ended up with, if we can drive to it, if we had to take it over, can we rent it? Can we sell it quickly? And so that was really kind of the single family lending start for us.
Right. And it's interesting because there's not a lot of family offices that we've interviewed on the show. There are a handful of family offices that are in the space. Some are larger than others. Some are more quieter than others.
Sure.
You guys have kind of taken a middle approach. Like, you've been actively involved in the space. We see you at a lot of shows. You know, your team member Gary, now your team member Michelle. But like, the interesting part is, like, you guys have been a very active a participant in the industry.
Sure.
And when easily, you know, you guys can have taken a back seat.
Sure.
And kind of just been a capital provider to back whoever, right? What was the kind of motivation to get out there and take a retail approach? I mean, working directly with brokers and getting out there and doing it.
Couple reasons for the conference circuit is we like the industry.
Yeah.
So we've always been supporters of the industries, like you guys and people that kind of elevate the industry to make it more clear, transparent. The people that that are on the regulatory side,
Right.
arguing for some of these, some of the laws, some of the bills that really are kind of detrimental to the business. And so we like that side of things. The more public side, as this product, as this what we do becomes more kind of generally known, then you get kind of larger diversity on deals. You get secondary markets that you're in, right?
And
secondaries
you're
of secondaries.
and you made a lot of comments to me about this. You are an investor in multiple fronts.
Yes.
And you're taking your experience over there into what we're seeing over here.
Sure.
And you've given me some interesting insights. But, like, I mean, since you've been in the space for so long, like, where do you? I mean, this secondary is so robust right now, right?
Huge.
And you
Right.
guys also sell to the secondary.
We do.
And I've just been I've only spoken about this with people who take a lender's perspective on it,
Right.
Not necessarily an investor's perspective
Sure.
on it. And what are your views on that? How, like, kind of the perspective of the current state of the market as an investor?
Yeah.
Right. Because I mean, you are a lender, you fund loans, but
Yep.
you're also an investor.
We are.
Right. So talk about that real quick, because it's a very different perspective. We don't get that on the show that much. So.
Yeah, the secondary legitimizes the market, right?
Okay.
It legitimizes the product. So
Okay.
you go, well, it's industrial grade or institutional grade, let's
Right.
say. So there's like secondaries of secondaries now. And so you've got these large mega funds, sovereign wealth funds, which lower the cost of capital.
Sure.
Which, you know, you're not getting like the 14, 16% anymore.
Right.
But you're getting these lower costs of capital, and it pushes the whole market down, which, you know, people that got used to that kind of margin, you know, unfortunately, that's just not the environment going forward.
Right.
So people understand this product more, this kind of asset-backed security.
So I like that.
Right.
A legitimacy to the industry.
It does. Like
Right.
over time, as you see kind of the moms and pops grow up, and certainly you see more SaaS and technology being, you know, put in. So we're actually recently invested into a prop tech fund. So prop tech is anything that's whether it be Redfin, Zillow, Point, Revive, some of these things that are properly kind of technology companies. So you see more of that. And as people start investing more, there's a lot of automation that comes in this industry, which is
Right.
actually a good thing for us.
And does it improve the enterprise value of these lenders? Do you think? I mean, it's always been a question of enterprise value for me. Like,
Yeah.
M&A is now
Yeah.
becoming a conversation,
Yep.
and it's no longer like, oh, you do this much origination. Like, there's a value to an operating
Sure.
company now, and like, it never used to be a thing,
Right.
Until I would say 3 years ago, 4 years ago,
Yeah.
maybe. And what, I mean, how does that when you look at a operating company and you're looking at evaluating that? Is that software component a big driver for you? Is that level of legitimacy, if you will,
The
a
use
driver
of
for you?
software, it is. The use of software really kind of, for me, converts into scale.
Okay.
Like how scalable it is, how replaceable can I move in, replace some of the people and run my own tech or
Right.
run that tech. So I think all of that kind of ecosystem drives a lot of legitimacy to the business itself. And then now you get a bunch of little things that augment basically are augmenting like the business itself. Like you've got different product that come out, you get different spins in what we do, right? And so even at this conference and at the Captivate conference, you've heard a bunch of different lenders that create different product, right? And so I like that because it's becoming just a lot more efficient, and there are a lot more tools, and people are investing on some of these back end things. Like appraisals, loan servicing, all the API calls in to help with figuring out values, portfolio management.
That's
all
because the amount of vendor support in this space has become so robust. There's so many software companies now.
Yeah.
There's so many different kinds. It was usually just title appraisal, servicing.
Yeah.
Now it's and it's being driven into software too. And we're starting to see funds control being commoditized into software.
You got Lightning docs. You got all the docs.
Yeah.
So when you look at like Crunchbase and you look at all the companies that are in our space now that are venture backed, that are truly raising A, B rounds, right? And so you get guys out there raising some prop tech funds like the Saluda guys, the One Sharp guys, and it creates a lot of legitimacy into it, which I like. Which I think there's.
It from an investor's perspective, then you're saying is that it not only creates more legitimacy, but it also creates different verticals to allocate into, right? Not just into loans, not just into funds.
It becomes a little bit more trustworthy because traditionally, like let's say 10 years ago when we were part of this, it would be an investor trying to buy a loan. They wanted their name on the deed. Yeah. And then now you've got funds out there. Yeah. And then they're okay with funds. A lot more people are okay with funds.
It's become much more acceptable.
You're a part of the ecosystem. Yeah. Some of the legitimacy in all of this is really like every single line within the ecosystem really kind of builds this legitimacy kind of piece.
I like that perspective. It's a fresh one because we've always had discussions about kind of growth of the space and risk, but we haven't taken it from that perspective. I like that.
So from an institutional view, when you look at this asset class, traditionally you look at like pure return. Like I get a loan on a note or a property and it's at this amount. It's hard because you can't benchmark that anywhere. Every other investment grade quality investment has some sort of benchmark. Has some sort of like public benchmark that you can go to. And so like when you look at a fund, you can match up with another fund. Because there's a bunch of research companies out there that do that. We're kind of approaching that world.
I hope so.
And so when we go to Captivate, we invite a bunch of family offices. And although we have our own fund, it's really a small set of 5 families that I know. And so what we do is we recommend other funds that attend the conferences.
And you've been so helpful with a lot of our clients.
And I'll say, look at this, and all of them are running through filters and vets to understand and compare. And so some of these like benchmarks, some of these kind of places like hedge fund research, other places have actually benchmarks for these now. And so it's starting to get a little bit bigger, like Prequin's something that
more and more people are signing up for Prequin these days. People that I've worked with. Back in the day, it was like one client we're on there now. It's a few of them now. So.
We just invested in 2 REITs, privately traded REITs that are the top performers on Prequin. That are friends of mine.
If you're listening, get on Prequin, guys.
Well, you're always trying to like have a barometer of but it's benchmarking. What should I expect?
How can I compare myself and my performance to my colleagues, competitors, and upstream of me, and show why I have value as a sponsor? And that's starting to get done, and I think it's definitely a smart move, and anything along the lines of getting yourself in front of family offices, registered investment advisors, broker dealers. They all going to want to see that type of benchmarking.
I think there's a lot more indices that will get created.
Indices.
So,
I like the way
there's an index for everything, right? And so when it was interesting way back. 2008 and 9, when we did the life insurance premium policy, like financing, there was no index for it.
Really?
There was no index. And so you had a bunch of companies that were buying, you're basically funding premiums in the first couple of years.
Premium finance.
It's premium finance.
Yeah.
And so now there's a bunch of premium finance. And there's actually an index out there where you can benchmark off of. But back in the day,
this was also an interesting thing. Like a lot of folks on the show, we've had primarily been in the mortgage space only, right? They've done loans, real estate, maybe a little bit of NPL. But your background, I mean, when we talk in just, casually, we're talking about VC investments that you guys have made, PE investments you guys have made, family office type allocations to startups and up and coming companies. Like, it begs a question, like what percent of your allocation goes into the space? Like, is it a large, because you're active, we know you're active, right? But like, in the aggregate, right? And PrideCo, the family office,
Sure.
like how much are you guys putting into this space yourself?
I would say a third. Usually,
That's a good chunk.
you look at like modern portfolio theory, right? You look at this allocation spectrum.
Okay.
And you've got core assets, which
Yeah.
means I can sell and I can buy overnight. I
Yeah.
can create cash tomorrow. I
Right.
can margin it. These are the things that get custody. We use Fidelity Family Office, but they get custody at at a really large shop, right?
Right.
And we're traditionally been more index funds, ETFs. So we're
Yeah.
big DFA guys, dimensional fund advisors, parametric. They kind of have a spin on tax. We have a new guy on our staff that is doing bond trading.
Okay.
So he's creating bond ladders
Sharish?
and Sharish is in
Yeah.
there. Yep. So he's found kind of dislocation on kind of the bond market, and so he'll do that with a machine learning a piece attached to it. And then you've got hard assets, generates no money.
Right.
It's the family's houses, it's their stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So that doesn't create any return. That
Right.
requires cash.
Right.
And then you got the alt side. And the alt side, depending on what I find, is that if they're younger, then they have more on the alt side because it's illiquid. You can't turn it into cash right away. If they're older, they generally have a little bit more on kind of liquid securities. Let's say New Orange County is a little bit of an anomaly because everybody's done real estate. LA and like Orange County,
Right.
and San
It's
Diego.
a hub of real estate.
So it's more
yeah.
heavy. I find that families tend to be more heavy there.
Uh-huh.
But typically, people will have some sort of split on their kind of full portfolio and allocation. I always recommend to families to rebalance and reallocate every year. So we close out the year. So we've got a team with accounting and investments and all that, and then we compile all the reports around second week of February. We meet up, and then we kind of decide which buckets to allocate into. And so for us, really private equity, the subset is venture. Venture is really just a part of private equity, and that's traditionally operating companies. And then
Right.
you've got direct equities. So we do that too. And so we're into industrial buildings, self-storage, hotels, golf courses, multifamily, office. And so we've got those deals where we're LP investors. So
Right.
we're not sponsors. We write a check.
Right.
So we've got many of those. And then on the lending side, we like to be hands-on there. And so we do like to visit properties and things like that.
Are you still doing any of the ABL lending anymore? Or
Not much. We've done here and there.
mostly concentrated in this?
Yeah,
thing?
we've gotten a lot. The request there, it's a different circuit. That's
Yeah.
like what used to be called the CFA, the Commercial Finance Association. And so like you kind of bump into the Wells Fargo Foothills, that old group. The IFA, the International Factoring Association.
Yeah.
So we used to do those. We really like the private lending world and single family real estate. So we'll do 25% of the loans that we see. And, we're still really small and kind of small on purpose, let's say. So
Yeah, surprisingly, I thought you guys were like your staff would be a lot larger, considering the reputation of the family office and all that good
Sure.
stuff. And I came and visited you. It's a very lean team. There's
Yeah.
about 5 in the office.
in our office, there's
In Orange County, right?
5, yeah. And we've got 3 in Minnesota. And then we've got one of my partners, the son manages a large outdoor business that has offices in Oakland and Longmont, Colorado. And so he's got staff there.
Right.
A couple people there.
And they
But
help
pretty
you guys
lean.
out too.
Yeah.
Pretty lean.
Pretty
And-
lean. But I'll tell you that, depending on where the founder is, the patriarch of that the family we run is later stage in life, so turning 80 this year. And so, the things that you make investments in have a lot shorter duration. And we tend to invest on the out of the estate bucket, which is like for the kids, basically. And so you don't need that big of a staff. And so,
Right.
so even we know some guys that are in the billion range plus, and you can run it pretty efficiently. It's really about deal flow. It's really about how you underwrite deals, getting into deals, getting out of deals.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of tools too. Like portfolio management. In the past, you were kind of tied to like Advent. Advent was like the gold standard, and then all of a sudden you got Rocket IT, which is the Rockefeller family, has their own basically software that pulls in all the publicly traded data. And sometimes they could do alts too, but like Advent, and then Adapar came. Adapar venture funded. You can basically pull in, create all your charts for the family, do all that. So you can actually really manage efficiently large amounts of dollars and there are so many deal networks out there. So like in Orange County, we've got, 40 or 50 families that we're friends with. And
Right.
we'll, if we see a deal, we'll email or text each other, hey, have you seen this?
Right.
So we typically see a
And
lot of deals that
that's-
we cross-reference.
That's also so interesting is that the family office world is like how interconnected everyone is,
Yes.
even across the country. Like it's
Yes.
not just like
Right.
locally. And like, I mean, for those of you who don't know who he's probably the best networker you've ever met in your life. There's a steel trap up there. He remembers everything. But also, a lot of people. And I've always been fascinated about this, is that you have you have a very unique skill in that you remember people very well. And
Yeah.
and I gotta ask, like, how do you do it?
It's
Because
funny.
this man met me once, and I didn't see him for like 2 years, and he remembered my name, where I went to college, and what I did for Jurassic. I was like, how do you do that? It's a skill, man.
It is a gift. And the guys at my office, Gary and others, they're always like, you remember everything about every deal and every person.
Yeah.
And I it's interesting. I was kind of the backstory was I was born in Vietnam.
Yeah. Well, I was going to get into this, but wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I was the classic boat kid, and so 1978 we were on a boat from Vietnam. My dad kind of led the charge,
Yeah.
and we ended up on a random island in Malaysia. And I asked my dad where he wanted to go, and so options were Canada, Paris, because France was a Vietnamese,
Right.
Vietnam was a French territory,
Right.
or America. And my dad's like, well, are there any communists in America? And they're like, nope. He's like, we'll go to America. And so I ended up in Iowa as a 1-year-old in middle of the winter, and growing up, kind of being the only Asian person in
Right.
this predominantly Caucasian world. I kind of had to remember a lot of things and a lot of people and be memorable to myself. And so I got to be really good with names and faces. And as we moved a lot, we moved from smaller city, Mobile in Iowa, to Sioux City, which is the big city, which is like, 80,000 people, right? So we went from there to California, West Coast. So I moved a lot of schools, and I had to remember people like really quickly
Right.
and understand that. And it became a little bit of a developed skill because I think having that kind of EQ and kind of being face to face with people.
Right.
People really like that, and you get the warm and fuzzies and all that. And so it's helpful on the deal side because I do tend to remember like terms on deals.
Yeah.
Terms on deals, names,
Is
structures.
it an association thing
It is,
with a
yeah,
person?
yeah. It is
Okay.
completely. Yeah.
I've always tried to like figure it out for myself. So how do I improve this skill? Like,
Yeah.
do I associate names with deal points? I do that with my clients. I associate
right.
name,
You see a ton. Yeah.
client name,
Right.
and then with their fund type and their rates of return.
Yeah.
But not at the level you can, because I mean, not only that, but you're juggling multiple industries and family stuff.
Yeah,
and
it's all related though. I think for me, everything becomes relational in my mind. So it's
Right.
like a name's attached to like a logo attached to certain terms. So I'll know like this fund has, like a 6-pref, 50-50 split, and the kind of deals they do. And it
Right.
just kind of sticks. But then, my wife will give me a hard time because I don't remember birth dates, right? So it's like one of those things. So it's a trade. And so, at worst, you default to emails and your storage because we've been in it for so long, and we have a shared folder for all deals. And
Yeah.
so we'll see 80 to 100 deals a month, and I usually file every single deal into a master storage. And so typically I can type in a name or something that's related to a deal, like a fund name or a person's name, and it'll pull up all their prior deals. And so we'll see the decks, we'll see all these things
Yeah.
because people really, they kind of reinvent themselves a lot.
Right,
And
right.
that's on the hedge fund world, it's like that for sure.
Oh yeah, you always see rebranding and
Yeah.
and people lateraling and
Yeah.
new fund or fund 3 or
Sure.
and I want to go back into your background a little bit, and I always get really interested in this kind of stuff because I mean we're both Asian American, and very very few in the industry,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And we don't really get much of an opportunity to talk about kind of this kind of stuff. And you talked about growing up in the Midwest. I mean, when I heard that, I'm like, I know I have a lot of Vietnamese friends who immigrated, but not to the Midwest.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, they weren't there.
How did you end up in Iowa of all places?
It was interesting. We ended up at a small church that sponsored my whole family.
Oh yeah, okay.
We lived in the basement, and it was a great. Actually, I recently got to have that family, who were actually German immigrants, bring us over. And it's an interesting little dichotomy because I'm fully American,
Right.
U.S. citizen. Obviously love this country, but I have this cultural heritage.
Right.
And so, in this past couple of years, it's been kind of tenuous culturally, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to understand that balance of loving the country, but also respecting culture,
Right.
and that it's not necessarily two conflicting things. They actually can coexist very well.
And that's the ultimate challenge when it comes to, like, we talk about identity, Asian American identity lately a lot with these Hollywood things going on, and like,
Right.
and the API community and all this kind of stuff. And for me, it's always I've always had the same approach. I've always, like, they're not like, they can be synergistic. Like, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. I can be an American.
Right.
I can be patriotic, but I can also be very, very, I call it fobby, right? Like, I'm very fobby when it comes to a lot of stuff. Like, I speak mostly Korean at home. My children don't speak English. Like, I'm very in tune with my culture.
Right.
Like, I spent a lot of time in Korea, and it's okay. And it's part of being an Asian American.
Yeah.
And embracing that. And what I find challenging in being so. I'm like entrenched in the private lending industry.
Yeah.
And you're part of it as well, but you also have a foothold in other different industries as well. And like, I wonder how it is for you outside of private lending, because in private lending, primarily Caucasian, primarily male, but very accepting, right? Never had an incident, right? How is it outside of this industry for you? I mean,
for me, it's been great.
Yeah.
I mean, reputation, education, things like that go a long way. We are in a unique space geographically in Southern California too.
Yeah,
it's
very
kind of
diverse.
There's diversity, gentrification. It'd be tough in different parts.
Yeah.
I'd say, you're always trying to help people along too, because
Right.
you're helping people along because you have this. Recently it's been kind of this individual. These individual ideals versus communal ideals.
Right.
Right. And so it being Asian, we're very communal.
Oh, yeah.
So everything's for the community. So
Right.
there are certain things that people ask us to do, we'll do because we are culturally respecting our elders or
Exactly.
whatever. Right? And it's different here. And so helping people understand the bridge between that.
Right.
And so I've always wanted to be kind of a bridge builder.
And you've always been a bridge builder. You've been a very great connector. You've connected me with a lot of great people, and a lot of your friends who are doing some interesting things and now paying attention to our space. And you brought a lot of them to our Captivate show.
Right.
And one thing that was interesting, and I think it was one of your colleagues is doing something for the API community. He's doing a charity for...
The AAIG, the Asian American Investors Group.
Right.
So one of these, classic stories, sold off a business, and then, some of these people get referred to me, and they sit down and they say, well, what should we do with our money?
Right. And you've been a great connector for the entire group to like what we're doing over at Rossi, and like I was so excited to hear about that.
So what's interesting is that family, when I typically meet with a family that just ended up with a lot of money, I always say, don't make a private investment for a year. Go to some conferences, meet some people, and you're going to be the prom queen. People are going to love you and always want your money.
Right.
So get into something safe on the core side, and on the alt side, just meet a lot of people. And if you meet with the same person that can show you the same business card for a year, you're in a pretty good spot. And so this family, I referred them to a few estate planning attorneys, CPAs, and I said, go to these conferences. And it actually wasn't Captivate yet. I sent them to family office conferences. So go to these. And then a year later, they came back and they said, I want to get into private lending. I was like, wow, I think our industry's actually made it, right?
Yeah.
Like somebody came back to me and said, I want to get into that. So I said, well, funny enough, there's this Captivate conference coming up. And so they came, and out of that, they wanted to figure out what everybody else was investing in. And so they put together an Asian American investment group that's, 40, 50 people strong all across the country. And so I'd log in and I'd see all these faces during COVID. It's all on Zoom. And I'd see all these faces, and it's diverse. I mean, like pre-IPO shares to equity to private equity to venture to real estate, so all sorts of just really interesting people that made their money differently, and are interested in investing in a lot of different things.
And what's really cool about what they're doing is that they have a charitable component, right?
Yes,
and
they
they're donating to kind of causes that benefit the API community. Right now there has been some violence against the Asian American community, and they're trying to help prevent that and fight against that. And I think that's something that I have never seen come to our space, and outside of even the space of private lending, like when I was in EB5 or doing other real estate work, we never saw that many API causes, and I was really happy to see that.
Yeah.
I was really happy to see people take our causes seriously.
Yeah.
And we had clients pitch to them and contribute, and I thought that was such an honorable thing to do when it's so easy as an investor just to kind of focus on you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we get a lot into the charity piece.
Talk about that. Actually, you're very involved in charities, right?
I'll play in about 7 charity golf tournaments this year, but we are involved in charity. We've done, personally, I've been to Egypt a number of times distributing wheelchairs. So we work with Free Wheelchair Mission. And so great story of an engineer that was retired, and he designed a wheelchair made out of like a plastic lawn chair with wheels. And he realized a lot of people outside of this country can't afford a wheelchair. And, they're actually very big and heavy.
And they're expensive.
They're expensive. And so he designed this thing to be under $40. And so the first time we took a trip to Mexico, and he wanted to come, and we distributed the first wheelchair then. And so kind of ongoing, I mean, it's been over 1 million wheelchairs now, and they'll ship containers at a time. And so when you give people dignity to allow them to be able to sit above the ground and not have to crawl, not have to have a family member carry them.
Because that's the thing that's forgotten, right?
Yeah.
In third world countries, if you're not able to walk, you're crawling.
Yeah, you're crawling.
You're crawling. You're not walking. I mean, you're not in a wheelchair. You're having to sit on the floor.
So
or the ground.
freewheelchairmission.org, great institution. They work with secular and faith-based organizations. We've worked with many places that, we have the benefit of having capital.
Yeah.
For example, places like Kenya, other African countries, they don't have access to capital.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that have great businesses. So we funded one gal. Actually was a Harvard grad, married a Kenyan, and she created a sanitary pad made out of sugarcane waste.
Oh, nice.
And so sugarcane waste, so a typical pad will cost a couple dollars, Procter & Gamble type product.
Right.
And she was able to create it out of sugarcane waste.
Right.
It's interesting, like manufacturing process, but it's at about a third of the cost. And what we figured out,
and it's biodegradable.
Yeah, biodegradable. And so in Kenya, one of the biggest issues is when girls get pregnant. When they can't afford a pad, they end up out of school, and sometimes they'll end up either being pregnant or HIV positive. And so there's a big issue there. And so there was actually a measure on GDP loss because women didn't go to school.
Right.
And so this pad was created, and we funded the first $50,000 through a group in this faith-based organization. And afterwards, they actually got a Gates Foundation grant for $3 million.
Wow.
And so they're manufacturing these low-cost pads.
And it's kind of simple. It's similar to investing, but you're taking a charitable investment and as an impact component, and you're at the ground floor.
Right.
That's awesome.
Right. So we've done a lot like that. Table lending, which is basically lending to small businesses there.
Microloans.
Yeah, microloans, things like that. And tracking microloans. And so there's a big charitable component. I think, when you think about, for me, the way I kind of evaluate how I'm doing and the balance of my life, I'm looking at, there's actually a grid that I do, which is kind of 4 pieces of the grid: my life, professionally, my family, and then where I serve and volunteer. So if I can balance out those 4 squares, I actually, get a lot more enjoyment out of my life.
And that's interesting because we've heard of the 4 quadrants rule and prioritization and goal planning and these kind of things from a business leadership standpoint, but you're using it more of a personal balance perspective. And what were the 4 quadrants? So professional,
personal, professional, family, volunteer.
And you have objectives
service.
For all 4.
I do. So one example would be you get 100% of your time. So whatever that amount of time is per week.
Yeah.
So how do you spend your time? And most people will say work, right?
Right.
And so, as when you're younger and then you get married, your family, because you're a family, you got young kids, so your personal time will shift to your family.
Right.
Well, a lot of times, like me, you get unhealthy, like physically.
Yeah.
Right. So you gain a little bit of weight. You don't feel as good. You're eating terribly because you're at conferences all the time, right? And so you got to rebalance that out. And so I kind of do a check to see, all right, when I do all these things, they all kind of fit together for me. Because if I'm too focused on one thing, I become a little bit kind of siloed off, myopic, however you want to say it. I become a lot more unhealthy. And so when all those 4 things fit,
I'm falling victim to that right now. I mean, and good question. A good question as a segue is, so we talk a lot about family.
Sure.
And you have 3 young children?
3 kids, 10,
kids.
7, and then surprise baby's 19 months.
19 months. So
Right.
we're on the same young baby boat. I've got a 10-month, 11-month-old. But the thing that's always fascinated me is like, you know, you're very busy. You're active in the family office, the industry as a whole for private lending. Yet you have a very balanced work schedule, right? You told me
Right.
the other day,
Yeah.
you're a 9 to 4 guy. You play golf a couple times a week.
Yep.
And I know this for a fact. You're traveling with your family all the time.
Yeah.
I
Try to.
mean, yeah, and it's crazy because for me, it's like my wife and I have trouble balancing 2 children with my work schedule, and she doesn't even work. And it's like I've always struggled with this personally, and I think part of it is I'm very myopic. Like I'm in work mode right now.
Yeah.
In my life, and I'm in build mode. I'm in work mode, and I can't think about anything else. And it's a real question to use. Like, when did you kind of transition and figure this all out for yourself? Because you're a little older than I am, so I mean, you know,
thanks for pointing that out.
not that much older.
You know, early on, I worked a lot when I was younger.
Right.
So I was
background. Point of background. You have worked for very large companies.
Yes.
Before
Yeah. So I
family
was
office.
Arthur Anderson kid.
Yeah.
And so the clients that I was on for like Southern California Edison, Massimo, that got delisted, Buy.com that went public.
Oh, yeah.
So I was on really great clients, but
Right.
you know, this is 80 to 120 hours a week.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're like low level staff.
Yeah.
At a big 5 accounting. And then I went to a company that helped start Bluetooth, and then Aramark,
Yeah.
publicly traded.
Yeah.
And I had Ohio West in food service for universities. So I was the director of finance, and that's 4 time zones. That's
Yeah.
25,000 miles a month.
Yeah.
That's corporate headquarters in Philly. So you're always going to Philadelphia. You know, everything was kind of East Coast.
Were you single at this time?
I was single.
Okay.
Right. So that's the only way I could have done it.
Right.
And one thing I kind of saw was, one, my dad traveled a lot, and he wasn't around that much.
Yeah.
And so when he was around, we made the best use of time.
Right.
But he was working as hard as he could because he was an immigrant,
Right.
like trying to provide a life for me, right?
Right.
And so I totally respect that. I needed to get to a place where I had enough margin to be able to do these things that allow me to like enjoy all aspects of my life. And I did see. You know, you lose out. Time is the only thing you can never get back, right?
Nope.
And people say that, and it's a known thing. But
Yep.
I had to purposely create margin. I've had a number of mentors that would always say, "You will do fine financially. Beg, borrow, and steal to get time with your kids because it goes fast."
Right.
And so every single summer we try to take a break, and 3 to 4 weeks we'll do these trips. Travel trailer, camping,
Right.
you know, Airbnb, elsewhere in different place. Where for us, it's in our family, no screens and
Oh yeah.
or fewer screens and lots of outdoor activity.
I see that.
Yeah.
You guys go fishing. You're out there.
We're kayaking, we're
Yeah.
fishing, we're lighting fires and
Yeah.
you know.
Well, so, from a work standpoint,
Yeah.
is it full? I'm out 3
No,
weeks.
Not at all. So when you're an owner,
Yeah.
when you're a person that really wants to do well in all aspects,
Right.
I don't think you can ever stop.
Exactly.
So I sign in the mornings, and then I've kind of got it set up to have all the people that know what they're doing. I have great partners that when I'm out, they take the load, and when I'm out, you know, when they're out, I take the load.
Right.
And so I still approve wires. So I'm there
So
approving
you could
wires.
be in the mountains somewhere, and you're
Right.
still approving. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're still working.
Yeah.
Trying to balance it out
Yeah.
while you're there.
But I'm not so much working that it's kind of consuming time. And the thing is, I think you got to figure out the phase of where your business at. Are you in growth mode, build mode? Are you
Right.
in kind of maintain mode?
Right.
And so if you're trying to build your book or you're trying to train an associate,
Yeah.
you know, you're working pretty hard.
Yeah.
For me, I've been 14 years here. So
Yeah.
we've got systems in place. We've got structure, kind of process in place.
Right.
And we've hired great people. So these people can, all the employees can basically take on their vertical or their function.
Right.
And we don't need to worry as much about it. But it takes effort and thoughtfulness to be able to
And
do
that's
that.
the hardest part, is the thoughtfulness for
Yeah.
me. Because like my brain almost always goes to work, and we're in growth mode.
Sure.
We're trying to grow more, and my brain automatically goes to it. And like I always get yelled at for being kind of I'm like looking away. I'm looking at the clouds or that. When I'm at home, I should be focused on my kids, and it's because I had a random thought I'm trying to like process and plan it out in my brain.
Yeah.
And And then you get NEF screens and these kind of things getting in the way.
Yeah.
And I've had such a hard time becoming thoughtful and intentional about
creating margin in the office is the hardest thing to do. 'Cause
Exactly.
when you have
Yeah.
people in the office, you get the knock on the door, or it's like lunchtime. I've had to create, and that's why I golf a lot.
Right.
So I create space within the office to like think, because you're always, being the partner, you're always 3 to 4 steps ahead.
Right.
You're thinking about a new product, and I think what's interesting about this timing is that you're in an interesting space in the market, time in the market, because of the secondary changing, because of some of the
market
rules.
evolution has changed.
It's changing pretty rapidly for you. So for me, it's not changing that much. I can take a little bit of a step back as an allocator and go, all right, let's let things shift out, and then we can decide. We can always just sit on cash, for example. But I do get that things are changing, and you're constantly evaluating and think about what's next. But what's the greatest thing is when you go home, your kids have no clue and they don't care.
They don't care.
They don't care.
They have no idea. They have no idea.
Your wife probably doesn't either.
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean,
my
she's
wife
like,
really cares and asks questions.
Yeah.
But I don't want to.
I'm very big of like, I don't want to burden you with my problems kind of like husband.
Sure.
So I'll tell her positive things, but like, if we're in a crisis or we're trying to like work out a new product, I'm not going to, kind of like brainstorm with her just because she's got her own problems and play to deal with. I mean, she's got 2 young girls that constantly need attention. But it's, and a lot of us in the industry are young, have young children and are building our careers. And I always joke about this, like you, and then a person you introduced me to, Paul, another family office manager,
Paul's great.
are like my heroes, right? Because you're Asian American, you run a family office, you have young kids, and you also have a balanced life. And it's always been something like, man, it's like what I can aspire to, but like almost like, can I ever actually achieve it because of the question of margin? Right, it's that margin, creating that margin, like as you put it. It's a good way to put it because we're all financial guys. We're thinking about margins. It's a really good way to put it. And I think a lot of our listeners struggle with it constantly because they're always so focused on it. And a lot of them are small business owners, right? And so they're just doubled down on always growth mode.
Right.
So grow or die, right? So
And really, you get these business groups that are really helpful, like-minded peers.
Yeah.
And it is really helpful to have other people that you can process these things with. And so that's why I always recommend like the YPOs. Gen Next is a good one. The Business Builder, the masterminds, people do a lot of stuff like that. And it's helpful to have that time to devote, because you'll have a couple people that you really enjoy out of that too. Yeah. And so they do, quarterly meetings, and you're paying your fee, but it's highly worth it.
There are folks that have been through it already, and folks that are going through it at the same time, and it's you get a lot of. I'm an EO. It's the lower version of the YPO. Yeah. And it's been valuable. It's not lower. It's different. Yeah, in my group, we have people who've done it already, and now they're kind of like just on autopilot. Sure. And they've, all their kids are grown, and it's so interesting to learn about like what they went through. And but at the same time, it's like, that's great and that's fine and dandy, but when I'm in it, I'm in it. I think you need to find. I think I have multiple sets of groups that fulfill different needs or questions that I have, and one of them is you need to find somebody else that's within your stage now, growing a different company, and that you can who can commiserate with you. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. But I think commiserating with an agenda is important. Of course. Because a lot of times you get into these sessions where you're just complaining. Right? Yes. And it's not the most healthy thing to do. And so structurally, finding like something to go through, like, okay, how are you solving for this, and like moving the things, and that's one thing that I tend to do. Let's not waste our time just bitching and moaning. It's not worthwhile. I mean, sometimes you do need a vent because you just had a horrible day, but frankly, getting it out, helping to either verbally process it or having somebody else that kind of like you can speak in short sentences with, be able to get to that. And so, I always recommend that. And you learn so much, right? Because that's why you go to these conferences. Right. We'll go and like have a drink or cigar or something like that, and we'll talk about growth, and you get a little bit and I get a little bit. Yeah. And that's one of the great added benefits that you go to these things. You hear about what guys are doing to grow their company. Right. And I ask them, like, it's like staffing and HR and other things that we're talking about in the industry, like other unrelated issues, but are so important to growth.
And I think as a business owner, you're always thinking about that. You're thinking about like, what are my next few hires? What do I want my culture to be? How am I going to bring them on? What's the remote work look like?
Oh, yeah.
How am I, like if I grow too big and, you've got layers of staff, how are they going to buy into culture? Because you're not
just buy-in, but retention.
Totally.
That's been, with COVID, that's been our biggest challenge is retention has been,
Yeah.
a lot of people have to complain about that. It's hard to hire and it's hard to retain. And
Yeah.
Well, I want to switch gears just a little bit because I want to before we run out of time, I want to get your thoughts on kind of perspectives on where we're at in the market right now because you talked about it already. Secondary is massively booming, but what's also interesting is there's new market entries abound.
Sure.
The industry is very, very hot at the retail level, the broker level.
Right.
There's never been more deals done before.
Right.
And since you've got so much experience in the sector, you've been in it as long as some of our oldest clients.
Right.
Talk about kind of what your views on this. A lot of people have had kind of a very cautious perspective on it. And here at CMA, we talk about a lot of folks have been doing it 30 years, and they're like, it's they're very doom and gloom about where we're headed to. What do you think?
It's always troubling with some of the regulation.
Yeah.
The bills that come out that are repackaged and maybe short-sighted.
Yeah.
So that's always tough. We're in a much different space than we were 10 years ago. There's a lot more efficiency, like we talked about earlier, as far as access to capital, technology.
Yeah.
The deal side is always so regionalized and so like specific.
Yeah.
You get blurred lines between who's a broker, who's a lender, who's a secondary.
Talk about that because you're a lender yourself, you're a direct lender yourself. So I know what you're talking about for our audience, the blurred line of the originator versus the broker versus the lender.
Sure.
From your perspective.
Many lenders now are brokers.
Yeah.
And they're all, because, they can bring on a deal and either table fund or warehouse it, sell it off. And so there's so many different things. And then, of course, the secondaries came in, and then there were secondaries of the secondaries, and they started lending directly to the broker.
Right.
So really, who's like an originator, who's a lender, who's a secondary, right?
Right.
So there's so many, and that's a market becoming just a lot more capital efficient. I think that's just where it is. And so the question is like, where do we go from here? How are there new entrants? And like when somebody's new that's forming a fund or starting to be a broker, is there still a business for them? Brokering is such an interesting thing because I do think that as much as people try to make that more efficient, there's so much regional and local knowledge that has to be applied.
Of course.
And you can automate. We were talking at our table today. You can automate as much as you want, but there's a lot of judgment that happens.
Of course.
And so you can automate your fund docs and everything, but there's some judgment that needs to happen. And that's what you rely on. It's kind of the inefficiency of the market. And so there will always be inefficiencies in kind of localized geographic deals, types of deals, however you want to kind of slice and dice it and categorize it, right? It's going to be more efficient. We know that. There will be different products that come out.
DSCR is on fire.
Yeah, DSCR, you got 30, a long time ago, you never would see a 30-year product, right?
And now there's BRRRR loans.
You got reverse hard money mortgages, right?
Yeah.
You got stuff like that.
ARM loans too, and in hard money, so it's...
And you got prop tech coming in. There's a company out there that I met with that has a concierge service. They have a concierge service. Homeowner wants to sell their house. They can borrow money from these guys, and these guys manage the entitlement, architectural permit process, and the building. And then they also, by the way, will buy your second house for you. And they buy the second house for you, and when you sell your first house, then you transition in. But they've already automated the traditional, loan that's already done. So you get a bunch of interesting people that are in the space that are cracking the nut. Now, when you go back to getting a deal done, being a broker, there's so much real estate and so much activity that I just don't know that ever goes away.
Yeah, I was talking about this during our pool manager meeting today, and it was kind of like, oh, we're not winning in these states where we thought we could advertise and we can win. And I stressed to them, like, guys, there's a lot of local components to this.
Yes.
You can't go into Texas thinking you can just advertise when there are shops that have been there 20 years.
It's still such a highly relational, localized business. Advertising is we've had a number of families that have exited marketing, web marketing, internet marketing, SEO type companies. One of them actually just went public last year. We've had another friend that sold off for 9 figures out of Taiwan. And these things, it's localized. You can't just go in, turn on a website, pay for AdWords. You can't put in a flyer. You can't, so some of these systems that really are trying to aggregate deals, it's more noise than it is quality sometimes.
That's a good way to put it. There's a lot of fog around that.
There is. I'll tell you that the most effective thing that we do, and we work mostly through brokers.
Yeah.
So our team has been dealing with certain people for a number of years.
Yeah, we share so many friends on the broker
exactly.
side.
Yeah. And so we've tried kind of working with the different networks, and you end up with a lot of noise. And to be able to sift through that, I mean, we end up doing about 25% of the loans that we see.
It's a pretty fair number. 1 in 4 is definitely not bad at all. I think you're open-minded enough, but you have to be saying no to a good chunk.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a common thread on the show because kissing frogs is a pretty common thread.
I do think it's a little bit frothy, though. It's frothy when you got somebody that traditionally was one state and they're moving to different states, or they're moving. So you're either going to change your geography, or you're going to change your product or your underwriting standards, right? So your product is going to be, you're going to do seconds now, or you're going to do some augmented first, or you're going to change a little bit of a different spin on something, right? Changing the underwriting boxes, maybe you're heavier on asset-based than credit-based, and all that. And so you're seeing that, and that's just the definition of a little bit more of a frothy market. And so we're watching. We had that question of where do you think the market's going to be next year? Certainly everything on the news is inflation. Who knows? I do think there's some variability, so you got to watch out for variability.
Yeah.
And the ultimate way to control that is having no leverage and being like short duration, right?
Right.
That's like
minimize risk that way. Yeah.
So that's how we minimize risk.
And you made an interesting point about like the idea of expansion by taking on more risk, right? And what I've seen work from some of my clients who are retail, who are not wholesale, who are not an aggregator, they're just a retail lender. They've got a fund. They have to open an office locally. They have to hire someone locally.
Right.
They have not taken on more risk. They've taken on more expense. They have to open up a shop there, a branch there, if you will.
Right.
And they had to write their local credit box to the locale. It's less risk than they're taking in their home state because they know their home state. And I found that to be a very successful strategy.
It is.
But then we have some guys who just like try to blast the whole country, and that's been, it's a smoke and mirrors move. I feel like it's projected success. Everyone thinks they're killing it, but let's look at the actual deals and not the deal flow.
Yeah.
Are you winning against local competition?
I think it's a little bit of an inorganic growth, right? Like it's an acquisition type growth. So you're just kind of blasting it out. So we look at we always think about in business like base business, organic growth versus inorganic. And so you're kind of like shotgunning to be able to
It's happening these days.
It is. And a lot of people want to grow because they have so much overhead. They need to support the overhead.
Yeah.
Or they have access to so much capital that needs more deals, and you're making so much margin on these spreads, right? Makes total sense.
Yeah.
I think it really comes down to like who you are as a business, what your values are, what you want to be when you grow up, kind of thing. And that's really this thoughtfulness.
What you want to be when you grow up.
Yeah, that's really
important.
this thoughtfulness of 5-10 years. Do you want to be levered, selling into the secondary, and originating, 200 million, $1 billion, $2 billion? What if the secondary goes away?
Right.
What if that buy box changes? You got to think a little bit about that. I do like. There's certainly when you look at like the map. Actually, recently we've got we're seeing deals all the time, and we're looking at equity deals.
Yeah.
So these are LP equity into mixed use. All these deals that we do, right?
Like a value add project or a syndication.
So we looked at one in Chicago. We looked at one in Illinois, and we were looking at population growth, and we saw the fact that it was kind of a negative population growth there, and generally the Northeast.
Yeah.
And then California is like a minus 6.1%. Idaho is like plus 16%.
Yep.
And so we do look at that and we go, okay, that kind of makes sense that you would go into the places where there are hubs for growth, hubs for business growth, kind of migratory growth.
Right.
So we are looking at that. And so we'll end up doing, through more strategic relationships, different states, but it's because we have a very specific person that.
But
we've gotten to know.
you're choosing that new market because the person that's bringing you a deal you have a good relationship with and you trust them.
I do. Because when it's interesting because if you go to Nevada, for example,
Right.
it's a brick and mortar state
Yep.
like Arizona.
Right.
Okay, so how do you find that guy?
Right.
So you find the guy and you cut a deal with them. That is you want to treat it like a transaction, but it's actually a relationship, right? Because you kind of co-own something with somebody.
He's either working for you or partnering with you.
Exactly.
So you gotta trust the guy.
So if your deal's not rich enough incentive-wise, and he's doing enough, 25, 50 million, call it whatever you want, he'll go off on his own.
Yeah.
So why should he pay the house when he can just go on his own?
Yeah,
So,
but at the same time, you just mentioned something extra as you're looking at, you're evaluating a new market, not because your competition is doing it, not because everyone else is doing it, but because
Right.
of population growth.
yeah, I do.
Supply and demand.
It is.
Purely.
It is. Population growth, the right population growth.
Sure.
Yeah, so certain markets grow because universities, businesses. So like Austin 5 years ago, we were involved in Oracle and SAP went down there and
Yeah.
built some pretty big facilities.
Now Tesla's going out there.
Yeah, Tesla's
Yeah.
going out there. We saw that, and so there was a 500 unit apartment complex that was a value add that we were involved with, and that did very well because it was
course.
down the street from Oracle.
Yeah.
And so there are these areas that like Nashville's of the world, Scottsdale's.
Yeah.
It's done. I would look at those. South Carolina is, of course, like the hottest place in the
Yep.
world.
Yep. I was just talking to Lima One. They're down
Yeah.
in Greenville, and they're like, it's
Greenville's super
growing
hot. Right.
so much, and like North Carolina, Tennessee, it's just been fascinating to see
Yeah.
that migration.
I think figuring out the criteria, you look at like, all right, is it population growth? Is it number of professional job growth? Or,
Right.
Like whatever it is, I would have a disciplined approach to it, and I wouldn't do it just because like it's higher rates there. Like a lot of people have felt like moved to states like Florida because it was like higher rates.
They're chasing yield.
Yeah, but it is like Florida makes a lot of sense because it's no state tax.
Right.
Right. I just worry about like sinkholes and
Yeah.
it's a judicial foreclosure state.
It's also just
So
yeah.
you've got to do
a
a lot
large
of work.
chunk of the state is actually sinking. Yeah, that's what I've been told at least.
So we spent a lot of time out in like Naples and that area, and I'll tell you that a lot of the bad equity deals we did were Florida back in like 2008 and 9, and some of these deals that pop up, it's hard because it's just a little bit different there, and so for us to be able to understand new market, we try to really understand the new markets.
Right.
But if some people are brokering, some people are like finding
that's
a
okay
deal,
too.
and that's fine.
Yeah.
That's a business strategy.
I actually have for brokers who know and hold themselves out as brokers.
Yeah, it's great.
I think it's great.
I look at it as there are many old houses.
Yeah.
I mean, when we're talking old, like 2005 is old
Yeah,
now, right?
yeah.
So those houses need to get remodeled.
Yeah.
And because people like us, if you're buying another house, you're probably not going to do a lot of work.
No.
Right? You don't have the time to do the
Turnkey,
work.
please.
Right. So there are so many houses across the country that need that, and we provide that specific piece of capital, that's bridge capital,
Right.
to be able to get that value add done. Right. And so I think that makes total sense. And there are many models out there where people go and get, all the different states, and they go out there and get it. But I some of the tertiary areas I'd be concerned about. I wouldn't want that on my balance sheet.
All right, so last question for the show. We got about a little bit of time left.
Sure.
I always ask this on everyone, and you're an investor, and
Yeah.
you have such strong insight into just big picture, the state of the market. I'd like to ask you, bullish, bearish, next 3 years for private lending.
We're a net lender, lower LTCs.
Yeah,
I would stick in high density, high volume areas.
right. So your core kind of philosophy, are you bullish on it still?
I am.
Okay.
I am. So on that, I would watch duration. There's a little bit of duration risk, I think.
It's true. The length of your average bridge loan is creeping.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people are pushing it up a little bit. We're still 1 year and under, and our average, our whole portfolio will turn in 10 months, less than 10 months.
The popularity of the rental loans nowadays, I feel like forces the bridge to be a little bit longer.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, so and there's a lot of good data out there in the rental loans, especially if you do. There's more short-term rental loans
Yeah.
out there, like for the Airbnbs.
Yeah,
There's not
yeah,
many
yeah.
lenders that did that, but
It's becoming more popular, I think.
there should be probably a fund that gets started somewhere,
Yeah.
maybe for one of your clients. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of data you can buy now, like AirDNA and some of these sites where you could basically buy data and figure out the rental and the debt service coverage on it. That's kind of interesting. But we are net buyers on things that make sense.
Yeah.
We've been big on industrial buildings for a while along transportation corridors. So for us in Southern California, the 10, the 40, the 15.
Oh, yeah.
So we're net buyers of those. We think distribution, logistics will be there. We like the multifamily world. We do like value add more than kind of ground up construction. But that's where the value is. So, you know, certainly you got to chase things like that. We've done some venture work on the. We just invested with a large family that's a food family. So this venture fund does like basically integrated food solutions. So that's interesting. Supply chain for food.
Yeah.
So think about food, you know, as you go into space and things like that. We've done a lot of investments in robotics. Certainly robotics is heavy. We're office with another family that's got 4 funds, and he's had this guy's had $6 billion exits in 7 years. A lot of robotics. So a lot of like
That seems to be a very
machine
big,
learning,
big,
AI, robotics, construction equipment, farm equipment. So we're in those venture funds. So we like that. So, but private lending world, there's always a market out there. I would probably scrub pretty hard on acquisition cost and values and where you think it is. We do a lot of stress testing on the portfolio.
Good.
So we test it.
Not a very
almost
common
monthly.
practice, which it should be done all the time. But
Yeah, there's resources out there that can where you can do it efficiently. So net buyer, I'd watch the durations and I'd watch leverage. Anytime you mismatch.
and when you say leverage, you're not talking about leverage like warehouse lines. You're talking about leverage like LTV risk.
No, warehouse lines.
Okay.
I would say now's the time to be careful because what we saw in 2008 and 9 was people were mismatching their warehouse lines with the duration of their end loans.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. So you had 1-year loans that got extended to 15 months, but then you had these warehouse lines that could get called anytime.
Yeah.
So that's a mismatch, and so
Right.
you're going to end up upside down.
Negotiate your term sheets, people. Yeah. No, that is so important.
Use an attorney.
It's so important.
Yeah. So the sales side is interesting because it really goes off your balance sheet.
Yeah.
And as long as there's no large kind of recourse clauses and like buybacks.
That's why you negotiate them. Yeah.
I would look at your buybacks and understand that to make sure that you have enough margin to cover.
And everyone's always said, "Oh, it's not a real risk. It's not a real." It's starting to happen.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
There's a place where the music stops, and maybe it's a temporary thing like COVID. At the beginning of COVID, right? Like we were like, "What the heck?"
Yeah.
And a month in, it kind of freed up a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, who knows if it's a long kind of ice age or it's just a little blip in the radar. I do think there's variability. No clue how long it lasts. No clue what it really looks like as far as percentage. I do know that if you're have a lot of equity and we run no debt, you're in a better position.
Yeah. I mean, that is kind of the traditional approach, especially here at CMA. Very, leverage is a bad thing. I think leverage is okay, but it has to be
Smart leverage.
cash management tool, risk management tool,
Right.
Not yield enhancement tool, and no mismatch. Mismatch on timing is going to be
Cash management. That's the right way to put it. We use a family line of credit. So even though I say no leverage, it's no leverage on the fund.
It's cash management.
It's cash management because you're always managing. You could do a whole episode on like portfolio management and fund management, right?
We could. I teach a class on it basically. At APL. And we're doing that this year. Is like most of the time is going to be spent on like portfolio risk.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we look at portfolio risk as far as the full portfolio, individual deal.
Yeah.
And then kind of the duration issues, which we don't have duration issues because we don't have any leverage.
You're short term,
and we're
you're not
pretty
doing
short term.
You're not doing any long.
We don't. I do. I do think there's a space for that. Because
there is. There's a market for it, but it's probably not like these privately held companies that are primarily looking at this from a fixed income perspective. It's not the right move.
Yeah, I think people write. It seems to me that people write these longer term deals, but they end up refining. The loans get paid off a lot quicker than you think, right? Anybody that takes a 10% loan for 3 years is not very wise.
Yeah, you gotta get out of that as soon as possible. That's the move. Yeah. Anyway.
Right.
All right. Well, you know what? I think that's about all the time we have.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining
Hey,
us on the
appreciate
show.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Always a pleasure.
As always, this hat is given to our guests. So there
All
you
right.
go.
I'll wear it proudly on the golf course.
And we'll get this episode out soon in season 3, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Lender Lounge with Kevin Kim. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you did enjoy, please leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform. And be sure to follow our show to be notified of new episodes. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe for more content from all of us here at Jurassic. Lender Lounge with Kevin Kim is available on all podcast platforms. Referrals really help us spread the word, so please send this over to someone you think might enjoy it. See you next time. This is Kevin Kim, signing off.